Welcome back. All right, I want to talk today wrestling. And what's interesting is that you've got AEW and WWE right now who are both doing very well financially. Both companies are performing quite well financially. Ratings from week to week may fluctuate. They may end up being low for WWE at one point, low for AEW the next. The week to week ratings are not as important now to the overall product as they used to be. There are a lot of other revenue streams. And even back in the day, you still had a lot of house shows that drove a lot of money for WWE and WCW. And when your house shows start drawing a lot less people, your company's in some trouble. So you haven't seen that as much lately. I know there are people who will take pictures of how empty some of the Raw and SmackDown arenas are, but honestly, again, WWE is making a lot of money. Their profits are up. And yes, some of that is because of the Saudi shows that generate so much money, but either way, however they get their money, they're getting it. It's all the investors care about. Now, comparing and contrasting the two, to me, I understand why there's this tribalism between AEW and WWE. Now, I'm going to come out and say it. I'm wearing the Varsity Blonde shirt. I do prefer the AEW product. I prefer it, but I still watch some of the WWE stuff. The difference being, I can watch an entire show of Dynamite and not fast forward it. WWE shows, I can't. There are always going to be segments I'm like, I don't care. The 24 hour title, I don't care. A lot of the behind the scenes, like backstage segments, are just very copy and paste, and I don't care. But that's the thing. I'm not saying this is bad and that's good. And I think online, very often with the internet wrestling community, which has been toxic for over 20 years, you want to do then, now, and forever toxic wrestling community. But the reality is that while people are tribal either for AEW and for WWE, the wrestlers themselves, I think the moving back and forth makes a lot of sense. Right now, Cody Rhodes, the whole idea of them going to WWE, it's really about, he's at this stage in his career where he's likely going to get really good money from WWE. He should get more exposure than he probably would in AEW. And yet AEW increased his standing, definitely made him look more like a main eventer than he did in WWE when they stuck him with the Stardust gimmick that was really kind of a joke. And he made it work. He made it work. He did well with it, but the Stardust gimmick did not, make him a champion of any sort. So really moving back and forth, I think while we make a big deal of it, I think for the wrestlers themselves, the most important thing is there's two different companies they can work for. It's completely different. And I think the most important point here is AEW is a wrestling show with elements of sports entertainment. WWE is a sports entertainment product with elements of wrestling. And I think that's the main difference. So, for instance, you have Logan Paul coming in. It's not about whether or not he can wrestle, which I'm sure he'll do well at Mania. It's about getting eyeballs on the product with the name Logan Paul. AEW does this as well, but not to the same extent as WWE. WWE, of course, every year you have your WrestleMania, which is the big show. For AEW, I guess that's all or nothing. But again, the celebrity tie-ins are still there, but they're different with AEW, right? And I think AEW's got a lot going on that's gotten better than it was in the beginning. The women's division took a lot of flack, and rightfully so in the beginning, but it's gotten a lot better. We are seeing feuds between women that don't involve the title, which is important. And sometimes WWE struggles with this too, where the feud has to have a title in it. And I think that speaks to sometimes the weakness of feuds, but that's a whole other side of things. Now in AEW, your win-loss record matters. They show the win-loss record of every wrestler when they're coming in. On the WWE side, does not matter. It does not matter who lost last week. It doesn't matter who won last week. They do a lot of rematches and is wins back and forth, which feels like it's something new, but maybe we just didn't notice it as much way back in the Attitude Era. Maybe it was going on then too. But it's one of those things they do where they go, okay, you're in a program with this person, and so you're going to have matches for the next 3 weeks, and we're going to come up with a storyline out of that, right? And so it's more of a storyline thing that has less to do with who beats who. So you can have, Dewdrop lose for 3-4 weeks in a row and then get into a title match because the losses don't matter. In the end, it doesn't matter. And of course, you don't get your clean finishes very often here. You get clean finishes here. And I think that's because the win-loss record matters. So if you're going to declare that the win-loss record matters, you have to get the shenanigans out, all of the DQs and countouts and everything, because then you might have somebody who say 14-3, but 3 of their wins are by countout, 2 of them are by disqualification. One of them was a forfeit. Like, you could end up with a situation where you could pull apart that win-loss record pretty easy. So as soon as AEW declared the win-loss record mattered, you had to make it so there wasn't as much of the shenanigans, which I think is good. I think it's good because with WWE, there are times where I'll just fast forward to the end of a match because I'm like, well, none of this is going to matter. So I'll just fast forward to the end and see who's going to run in, what's going to happen, or maybe I even know. I'll be like, oh, okay, so there's going to be a run in. The Miz is going to show up here. So, and then, 5 minutes later, oh, there he is. And so there's some predictability in there as well, right? Now, AEW, I think they do a good job with long-running angles and feuds. I think they've done a pretty good job of that. They do well with the slow burns, more than I think WWE, where there's a lot of short-term angles and feuds. Now, there's an asterisk there because there are times that they do it really well. There are times where WWE does long-term feuds really, really well. I'm thinking of like John Cena and The Rock when they met at WrestleMania twice, once in a lifetime. But the long-term booking there was good. And I think what we're seeing with Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar right now is actually really good. The long-term storytelling there has been quite well done, which tells me Paul Heyman probably has a lot to do with it. I think the short-term angles and feuds probably come from, I think part of it may have been WWE had way too many wrestlers, which is why I've got under here, they've been firing wrestlers since 2020. Hey, they had a bloated roster. So while I disagree with letting people go when you're making record profits, on the other side of it, I can understand looking at your roster and saying, we have 60 people here, 70 people here, and another 50 there. We've got so many wrestlers we aren't using right now. Why are we employing so many wrestlers? Whereas AEW, who's trying to build up their brand and trying to get extra hours and extra shows and everything, they've been hiring wrestlers since 2020. And there's going to be controversy with this too, because in the beginning AEW had a certain roster of wrestlers, and some of the more prominent names that have joined since then have bumped some of those guys down the card. So some of the guys who were there first, rightfully I would think, would feel kind of maybe a little bit resentful on some level. Like, okay, I was here at the beginning and then those guys came along and suddenly I'm not good enough to be on the show anymore. I haven't been on TV in a while. So I would understand if there are wrestlers that feel that way. If they end up doing dark elevation matches every week and they're watching, brand new guys coming in and getting primo spots in Dynamite, and they've been there for years. So this is a wrestling problem, though, because as a promoter, your job is to try to garner the most interest from the public you can. And some of these guys are bringing in are going to generate a lot of interest. So you have to kind of, make that work. So that's why AEW is hiring and WWE is firing. This is going to change. At some point, it's going to be that AEW, and we've started to see, Cody Rhodes is one, Joey Janela is another. There's going to be guys leaving AEW who may end up back in WWE. The other thing with AEW right now, the hiring is going to be partly because Tony Khan has bought ROH, which Vince McMahon was interested in. But this shows the difference too. Tony Khan is a wrestling fan. Tony Khan buys ROH. I would be very surprised if ROH suffers as a product with Tony Khan being in control of it. Vince McMahon would be buying ROH because he wants the library. He wants those matches. He wants the rights to all that. He's not really interested. Like, he'll hire a few wrestlers from ROH if he buys it, right? But in general, he's not interested in keeping the show on the air. It really is. It's a transaction about getting more product that he can have control over. So with WWE's digital content, he could throw a bunch more, old pay-per-views from ROH on his show, and he could use ROH stuff for backstage building up feuds kind of thing, guys who wrestled in ROH that are now in WWE kind of thing. So Tony Khan owning it, I think he'll do something different with it than what Vince would have done. They run their businesses differently, and I know there are people who want to see Vince McMahon step down. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think he is very centered on staying in control for as long as possible. And I don't know that he's going to give it to Steph. I don't know that he would even consider giving it to Shane, who's not employed by WWE right now. And I think Triple H maybe was being groomed to take over at some point. That seems to no longer be the case. So For people who aren't a fan of the product Vince McMahon puts together, I don't think there's a way out of this, because the thing is, let's just say Vince McMahon passes away. The person that would take over would likely have the same vision for the company that Vince does. And maybe, and again, I'm just speculating here, part of the reason Vince may very well have pulled away from giving the company to one of his kids, they may not have that same vision for the company that he does. They may not have an interest in owning it. I don't think Shane did. And I don't know that Stephanie does either. I don't know that Stephanie would want to be the person who's in charge of the whole thing. I think she'd be fine being on TV and doing a lot of the ambassador stuff she does. Stephanie, I've never heard anything bad about her. Sounds like she's fantastic to work with and work for. She's honestly, she was underrated back in the Attitude Era too. I always thought her wrestling was decent, considering she didn't have to. I mean, she's the whole princess and the whole thing. She didn't have to learn how to wrestle, but she did. And I honestly thought she was probably the best looking of the women in the company at the time too, which I thought was, it was interesting that they didn't play that up as much as, I don't know, you would think Vince McMahon, and I know some of the storylines he wanted to run that were really, no, Vince, no. But I honestly, I thought Stephanie was far more important during that era of wrestling than I think she gets credit for now. And I think she's tried to make the women's division more than what it was. I think she's done her best. I think Finlay did a lot for them. I think there's a lot of trainers that have tried to, to help that part of the wrestling industry out. And now we're seeing in AEW a lot of that too. Serena Deeb being in AEW, I think, is huge because she is an excellent wrestler, very, very good at cutting promos too. And honestly, if she's leading these women along and taking them to that next step, she's making Hikaru Shida a big star, which is weird because Shida had the title for a long time in AEW, but it never felt like her star really rose that much during that period in time. I think Shida's got a better look than she did then. I think she's getting better in the wrestling part of things than she was in the first place. And eventually, you build her back up to get her a shot at the title. And that's really what it is. And that's the difference. Where in AEW, you're building people up. In WWE, we often see wrestlers walk in the ring and say, I want that title. And the champ goes, sure. And it might be somebody who's won like 2 matches in the last 6 months. But it's again, the win-loss record is not important. So when we see the arguments between AEW fans and WWE fans, I think where the issue lies is that they're two completely different products. So if you are convinced that every moment of AEW programming is fantastic, you probably won't enjoy WWE. And if you think everything WWE does, or most of the things that WWE does, are great, you probably won't enjoy the AEW product as much. You're going to get a bunch of 20-minute matches. You're going to get a bunch of blood. You're going to get your hardcore matches on AEW. In WWE, you're going to get 5-minute matches. You might get 2-minute matches. You're going to get a lot of angles. You're going to get a lot of backstage skits. And again, the win-loss records really don't matter. So it is a completely different product from one to the other. Again, for me, I lean towards AEW, but I still pay attention to what's going on in WWE. With hockey season being on, there's a limited amount of time I have to watch one product or the other. So again, I would prioritize AEW, but I don't like I don't actively go out of my way to slam WWE and everything they do. I find it weird when people do that. I find it odd when people have to find fault with everything done by this company or this company, because again, if you're a professional wrestler in 2022, you have 2 viable companies you can work for. And then I'm not even talking about NJPW. I'm not even talking about AAA. I'm not even but the thing is, AEW is willing to work with those companies. WWE at this point seems to be willing to work with other companies as well, which is different. And I'm telling you, having 2 really powerful, healthy companies is best for all of the wrestlers. So if you care about the wrestlers, you should want both companies to succeed, not one die or the other one suffers. That's not going to benefit the wrestlers in any way, shape, or form. For the guys who perform, and again, wrestling's really weird when you step back and take a look at it. Professional wrestling is a bizarre industry. When you step back and you haven't watched it in a while and then you sit down and try to watch it, the whole thing's weird because you realize, okay, so this is all predetermined. This is weird, right? So yeah, it is bizarre. It's a question I've been asking my wife a lot lately. But I still enjoy it. I still get a kick out of it. And I think both companies do a pretty good job at building up the product as they see it. And where I think the criticism would come in is if AEW was a wrestling company and all their matches were short and the storylines weren't very well thought out and there just wasn't any long-term booking. And on this side, if WWE was putting like a 30-minute match in there that didn't really go anywhere, it didn't really do anything, it wasn't very exciting, then I think that's where you can put in some criticisms of the product, because it wouldn't be showcasing what they want to showcase. And again, AEW, wrestling company, wrestling. Because they're a wrestling company, I think they'll always have a smaller audience than WWE, which has the name recognition. Plus, it's a sports entertainment product. It's not just about the wrestling. And that's why they don't like the term wrestling. They don't like to say wrestlers very often, because to them it is sports entertainment. They are superstars, and you're the WWE Universe. And they want to formulate it so that the wrestling is kind of in the background, which is weird because all they hire is wrestlers mostly. Although models, guys out of the NFL who maybe fell through the cracks, guys out of your college football as well, and then of course your Olympians. Whoever you can hire that's got big name recognition, WWE's willing to do that. AEW is totally willing to do that, but they want the wrestling to still be your focus. So while you may occasionally have Snoop Dogg go out there and do something that looks a little dodgy, in the end, it is still a wrestling company. And I think that's your main difference. So I don't jump into fights online about wrestling companies, but I have noticed that there is very much tribalism, as I am all AEW, everything WWE is crap, or I am all WWE, everything that AEW does is crap. And I can't with a straight face argue one or the other is great and the other's terrible. I really enjoy AEW, but there are some things WWE is doing that are very smart. They're making good business decisions, and they leave the ethics and the whole morality issues. That's not important. What's important to them is their investors. What's important to them is making sure that their company's worth the most that it can be. So if they have to fire wrestlers to increase their bottom line and make their stock go up, they'll do that. If they're going to have shows in Saudi Arabia despite people having reservations because they make a ton of money on it, then they do that too. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.